think that looks decent. Okay. My name is Ruth King, and I wanted to just spend a few minutes with you explaining overhead cost per hour and why I started using this for pricing, so that there's no misunderstandings about what overhead cost per hour and why it is, in my opinion, the best way to price. And I'm also going to include a little bit about net profit per hour. And I want to start with a comment that was made by one of my clients who actually came to class one day. And I have a pricing for profit class and a building profit and wealth class. And this was his comment. Before I heard of you, I used every other formula in the world, including Richard Harshaw and Harlan Krepsek. And you came along and I used your stuff. And thanks to you, I started making money. And Jeff's a contractor in San Antonio, Texas. And this is, finally he started making money. And that was the really cool part about what we're going to do. So I'm going to start a little bit about why I developed it. And I'm going to explain to you what net profit per hour is in a few minutes, and you'll get it. So it's really easy also to calculate your net profit per hour. And then you know what to do and where to go. I started doing net profit per hour calculations and overhead cost per hour calculations back around 2004, 2005. I was working with a group of contractors, all who had about the same gross margins, and some of them were doing incredibly well and some of them weren't. So something wasn't right. So one day it hit me, it's not the gross margin that matters. Overhead is really, really, really important, and without overhead incorporated into whatever you're doing, gross margins really and truly don't matter. And I'm going to show you a graph showing that in a minute. And so I decided that, okay, we have to look at it from the bottom line, the very bottom of the PL in terms of net profit per hour, how much profit you want to earn for billable hour, and then we have to do overhead cost per hour. Now, Barry Burnett at that point was doing gross profit per man day, but didn't take it far enough, because you really have to look at your overhead cost per hour per guy, per field labor. And think about it, the only thing we have to actually make money with is billable hours. If a guy is in training, we can't bill for it, and we don't generate any revenue or profits because he's sitting in training. When he's at a customer's location, then you can start and bill that hour, and the customer will pay for that hour. So that's why our most precious commodity is labor. And I know there's a labor shortage and everything else like that, but we also need productive labor. And so I started it, and it just dawned on me one day that, okay, maybe, let's look at it from a net perspective, and let's calculate an overhead cost per hour per billable hour, and let's try it. All right, now I want you to understand that my clients are paying me, all right? So you would hope that they would listen to what I was talking about, and it took a long time for me to say, okay, just try this for a little while, and let's see whether you like it. And there was resistance like you wouldn't believe in it. Lo and behold, one after another tried it, and lo and behold, they all started making more money, and then they were hooked. And I think you'll find that once you really go down to the bottom line and you look at your overhead cost per hour and realize how much overhead you have to add for every single hour of billable time, the light bulb's going to go off, and you're going to start making a lot more money like Jeff did. So that's what I'm going to do over the next couple of minutes. And I want to just do it by first showing you a graph. And this is a graph that I use, every time I go and work with a customer. Let me just go do this. Let's do this. There we go. And let me screen share this. There we go. And so whenever I start working with a customer, I always pull 20 of their jobs. I don't let them pull it because, okay, that was a good job, or that was a bad job, or she really doesn't want to see this one, or I really want her to see this one. So these are 20 jobs from one of my clients. They're just identified by first initial, last initial for first name, last name. It's the selling price. GP is gross profit. GM is gross margin. Overhead cost per hour, which is what I calculated before I did this exercise with them, the number of hours that that particular job took, the net profit, which is simply the gross profit, and then subtract the number of hours times the overhead cost per hour, and then you get net profit per hour, which is simply net profit divided by the number of hours. All right, so we get our net profit by multiplying our overhead cost per hour times the number of hours and subtracting that from gross profit. And then our net profit per hour is simply the net profit divided by the number of hours, all right? So I want to show you two things. The first customer, JE, his gross margin is 40.51%, and his net profit per hour is $73.81. And then we go down to HT, where his gross margin is 40.27, which in my book is pretty close to 40.51, and he paid the customer $21.68 to do the job. Same gross margins, very, very, very different results. All right, so if you look over on the right, you're going to see, the negative 21. There's a, a negative 20 towards the bottom and a $4.98 and stuff like that. So some of these jobs that they thought did really, really well, and some of them that they thought, oh my gosh, we're not going to make a profit on this job, they actually earned money. And I want to show you two. So the first DG, the gross margin was 64.5%, and most of you are probably thinking, oh my gosh, I made a killing on this job. He made $49.95 on that job per hour, right? And then you have the 19.41% job, which you think, oh my gosh, we lost our butt. And they actually made more per hour on that job with a 19.41% gross margin than you did with the 64.5% gross margin. So gross margins do not matter, with the exception of that they need to be consistent all of the time, all right? So if your gross margin, and you calculate your gross margins at 40%, then they need to stay at 40%, 42, 36, 42, 36 actually don't matter. That's not good. 40, 40, 40, 40, 40 is where you really and truly want to be, all right? So that's why gross margins don't matter. That's why overhead per hour is so important. All right, now, their overhead per hour was $60.20, which is really, really high given the size company that they are. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it and talk about it from a more detailed in terms of how you can calculate your overhead cost per hour. So for every billable hour, how much does overhead cost? How much overhead do you have to add to every billable hour so that you know whether you're making money or not making money? So that's your overhead cost per hour. And if you do it in a quote-unquote math formula, it's total overhead divided by billable hours. So depending upon where you are, you can take last year's numbers, your year-end overhead cost per hour, and divide that by your billable hours for last year. And for some of you who may be by yourself in the field or something along those lines, you have billable hours and you have office hours. So you have to estimate the number of billable hours you actually had. How many hours could you bill a customer versus how many hours did you do everything else to take care of the business? And at the beginning, you may not know. In the beginning, you may have to make some guesses, but we basically have 2,080 hours a year. We subtract out vacations, we subtract out holidays, we subtract out meeting time, we subtract out training time. If you give them sick days, you take all that time out, and then can they bill the remainder of time? If you're in new construction or installation of replacements, probably. Service, probably not. So that's where you figure out your overhead divided by your billable hours. Start calculating it, start paying attention to it, and you'll start getting a really good sense of where your overhead cost per hour is. For last year, just take your total overhead that was on your P&L for last year and divide it by the total billable hours for last year. And you're going to get a number, whatever that number turns out to be. So I always get asked, what's a good overhead cost per hour? For service, it's under $40 an hour. And for those of you who are larger or smaller companies, it may be under $50 an hour until you grow to having more field people who can absorb some of the overhead. Maintenance, you want under $40 an hour. And for replacements, if you got just doing replacements, under $30 an hour, and under $20 an hour for new construction. So that's what I look at in terms of what I consider a good overhead cost per hour. All right, so let's go back to this guy, who was my client. We started out with $60.20 overhead cost per hour. They are a larger company, many multiples of millions, all right? So this was totally unacceptable. The guys weren't doing their jobs. They were, think about it this way. If we drop their overhead to $30.20 an hour, what's going to happen to their bottom line? It's going to go up significantly, and all of those negatives are going to turn into positives. I will also tell you that the negatives were all done by one crew. And the owner didn't know it at that point, but we really looked at it and said, okay, what do we do here? We tried training them, we tried splitting them, didn't work, and they decided to go through what I call my career reinvestment program, i.e. they got fired. You can't have a crew that's costing you money. Doesn't work. All right, so the other thing I want to just briefly mention is net profit per hour. So on the bottom line, after overhead, for every billable hour, how much do you want to drop to the bottom line? It's very similar. You use the same number of billable hours. You just take what you earned last year, net operating profit, divided by your billable hours. And if you had a loss last year, you paid your customers to do their work. Not exactly where we want to go. So these two terms and these two terms and actually calculating pricing these ways really and truly will give you an idea of whether you're truly earning money. So from that perspective, I suggest, you change your focus from divide by 1 minus the gross margin to looking at, all right, how much actually comes down to the bottom line for every billable hour that I have. And that's really where you can start earning a profit and making money, all right? Question that I always get also is, what's a good net profit per hour? Service should be $75 on average per hour. Maintenance, I just want you to break even. I'm talking about residential maintenance here, somewhere around $5 per hour, and jobs, construction replacements, anywhere between $500 to $300 per hour, depending upon what it is. I find that most residential contractors, if they're doing a residential job, stay somewhere between $100 and $200 an hour. I see those who are doing boilers and chillers and things along those lines at $500 to $1,000 net profit per hour. So it kind of depends upon what you're doing, what the, unfortunately, what the customer's value is of what you're doing to figure out what you want for a net profit per hour. But it's totally up to you. You own the business. It's your choice to say, can we do this or not? All right, if you have any questions about this, call me at 770-729-0258, which is my office number. My email is ruthking@hvacchannel.tv. If you want a pricing template, I'm happy to send it to you. Just send me an email, ruthking@hvacchannel.tv. I have pricing formulas and manuals, and they're all on hvacchannel.tv. So thanks for your time. Hopefully I've explained overhead cost per hour, net profit per hour, and start using it. You'll be like Jeff, and you'll make more money. Have a great day.